It was Thanksgiving morning at the Andrews household, and the air was alive with a blend of cinnamon, roasting turkey, and pumpkin pie. Golden sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow across the carefully decorated dining table. Emma Andrews, the family matriarch, bustled between the kitchen and living room, perfecting the smallest details with precision. To everyone else, Emma seemed like the perfect wife and hostess. Yet, beneath her composed demeanor, a nagging doubt gnawed at her. Over the past few months, she had noticed Michael's behavior shift. He was glued to his phone, disappeared with vague excuses, and came home later than usual. These signs felt small at first, dismissed as work stress. But no matter how hard Emma tried, she couldn't shake the growing suspicion that something was off. By mid-morning, her younger sister Claire arrived, carrying a dessert box and wearing her trademark bright smile. But to Emma, that smile seemed slightly forced, her eyes a bit too guarded. Emma embraced Claire warmly, but when she pulled away, she caught a flicker of something unsettling, nervousness or guilt. "Everything looks amazing, Em," Claire said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've outdone yourself this year." Emma forced a laugh. "Can't have Thanksgiving without overdoing it." The two sisters chuckled, but as they chatted, Emma noticed Michael across the room, sneaking glances at Claire. His gaze lingered too long, just enough to stir a knot in Emma's chest. It wasn't jealousy yet, but it was suspicion, creeping in like a slow, ominous cloud on a sunny day. The family began to gather, the house filling with cheerful chatter, clinking glasses, and the patter of children's feet. From the outside, it was a picture-perfect holiday, but Emma could feel the tension bubbling just below the surface. Michael and Claire exchanged glances during small moments. A quick touch of a hand here, a shared laugh there. Emma's eyes followed every gesture, her heart pounding with the realization that these were no ordinary interactions. When the appetizers were served, Emma excused herself to the kitchen. She needed a moment to breathe, to gather her thoughts before the suspicion consumed her entirely. As she rinsed wine glasses at the sink, Claire joined her, silently slipping into the room. "Need a hand?" Claire asked casually, her voice too light to be genuine. Emma glanced sideways at her sister. "Sure, you can start on the dishes." The air between them thickened with unspoken words. Emma's mind raced with questions she didn't dare ask. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. "Claire," Emma said quietly, "is everything okay between you and Michael?" Claire froze, her hands submerged in soapy water. A flicker of panic crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with a nervous laugh. "What? Of course everything's fine. Why wouldn't it be?" Before Emma could press further, Michael appeared at the kitchen door, his presence shifting the mood. He wrapped an arm around Emma's waist, planting a kiss on her cheek. "Everything good in here?" he asked cheerfully, though his eyes flicked quickly between the two sisters. Emma nodded, her mind racing. "Yeah, everything's fine." But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Something was brewing, something that would change everything, and once it came to light, their lives would never be the same. The dining room sparkled with Thanksgiving cheer. Candles flickered on the table, casting warm light over dishes of mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and golden brown turkey. Laughter echoed as family members settled into their seats, passing plates and exchanging stories. It was the kind of scene that could have come straight from a holiday card, on the surface at least. Emma sat across from Michael and Claire, doing her best to immerse herself in conversation. But each time Claire laughed a little too hard at Michael's jokes, or he poured her wine without being asked, Emma's stomach tightened. The way they interacted, it wasn't blatant, but it was just enough to set her on edge. From the corner of her eye, Emma watched as Michael leaned closer to Claire, ostensibly to pass the salt, but whispered something into her ear. Claire flushed, her face lighting up in a way that made Emma's heart plummet. It was a fleeting moment, but one charged with meaning. Emma gripped her fork tighter, her knuckles whitening under the table. Emma's parents, sitting at the head of the table, carried on as if everything was fine. They cheerfully recounted old family stories, unaware of the storm gathering beneath the surface. To everyone else, it was just another happy Thanksgiving. Only Emma could see the cracks forming. When the main course was served, Michael kept up his usual charm, seamlessly blending in with the festive spirit. But Emma knew him too well. The quick glances exchanged with Claire, the lingering touches, they weren't innocent. Claire, for her part, tried to hide her unease, but Emma could see the guilt in her sister's eyes every time their gazes met. Emma's Aunt Sarah cut through the noise with a playful remark that shattered Emma's fragile composure. "So, Claire," Aunt Sarah said with a mischievous grin, "when are you going to settle down and find a man of your own? Or are you planning to keep borrowing Michael?" The table erupted in laughter, everyone assuming the comment was just a light-hearted joke. But Claire's face turned ashen, and Michael's smile faltered for the briefest of moments. Emma's heart raced as she locked eyes with her sister. There it was, the truth, teetering on the edge, ready to spill out at the slightest nudge. Claire forced a brittle laugh. "Oh, come on, Aunt Sarah, it's not like that." But Emma knew better. She could see the panic hidden behind Claire's smile, just as she had seen it earlier in the kitchen, and the fact that Claire was trying so hard to laugh it off only confirmed Emma's worst fears. Michael tried to diffuse the tension. "Emma," he said with forced cheer, "do you need help with dessert?" Emma narrowed her eyes, her voice cool and deliberate. "No, Michael, I think Claire should help me this time." The room fell silent. Claire's fork clattered against her plate, her expression a mask of barely concealed fear. Reluctantly, she rose from her chair, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. Emma stood slowly, her heart pounding as she followed Claire toward the kitchen. This was no longer just about suspicion, it was about uncovering the truth, and Emma was ready to tear through the lies, no matter the cost. The kitchen door swung shut behind them with a soft click, sealing Emma and Claire in tense isolation. The hum of conversation from the dining room felt distant, like a world Emma no longer belonged to. She could feel her pulse thudding in her ears as she turned to face Claire. "We're alone now," Emma said, her voice low and controlled. "So tell me the truth. How long?" Claire stood frozen, her hands twisting nervously. "Emma, I don't know what you're—" "Don't," Emma snapped, cutting her off. "No more lies. I saw the way you looked at each other. I saw everything." Claire's eyes filled with tears and her voice wavered. It just happened. I didn't mean—" Emma stepped closer, her fists clenched at her sides. "How long?" she demanded again, her voice sharp as a knife. Claire looked down at the floor, as if the weight of her guilt was too heavy to bear. "A few months," she whispered. Emma staggered back, as if the words had struck her physically. The betrayal, once a shadowy suspicion, now stood before her, stark and undeniable. The air between them felt suffocating, thick with years of broken trust and shattered loyalty. "And Michael?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling with rage and sorrow. "Does he love you?" Claire bit her lip, hesitating. Her silence was answer enough. Emma's heart cracked wide open, her emotions swirling into a storm too fierce to contain. She had given everything to her husband, trusted her sister with her heart, and they had both betrayed her. Claire reached out, desperate to make amends. "Emma, please, I never wanted to hurt you." Emma recoiled, her expression twisting with disgust. "Don't touch me," she hissed, her voice filled with venom. For a long, agonizing moment, the two sisters stood in silence. Emma could hear the faint hum of laughter from the dining room, a cruel reminder of the facade that had masked this betrayal. And then, just as Emma was about to say more, Michael's voice cut through the quiet from the other side of the door. "Emma, everything okay in there?" Emma straightened, her expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. No, everything was not okay, not by a long shot. With one final withering glance at Claire, Emma turned toward the door. "Stay here," she said quietly, her voice like ice. "I'm not finished with you." As Emma opened the door and stepped back into the dining room, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The truth was out, and there was no turning back now. Emma stepped back into the dining room, her heart pounding like a war drum. The festive cheer that had once filled the room felt like a cruel joke now, hanging in the air, mocking her. She scanned the table, her gaze settling on Michael, who was already watching her with a mixture of confusion and thinly veiled concern. "Emma, everything okay?" Michael asked cautiously, his attempt at normalcy brittle and fragile. Emma didn't respond right away. She moved slowly, deliberately, back to her seat, her mind swirling with everything she had just learned. The room fell into an uneasy silence, family members sensing that something had shifted in the atmosphere, though they couldn't yet put their finger on what. Michael leaned forward, trying to maintain the appearance of control. Let's just get through dinner. We can talk about whatever's bothering you later, okay?" Emma locked eyes with him, her gaze cold and unwavering. "No, Michael," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "We're going to talk about it now." The table fell silent. Forks and knives stilled mid-air, and all eyes turned to Emma. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but there was no going back. She was done pretending. "Claire," Emma said, her voice carrying across the room like a warning shot. "Do you want to tell them, or should I?" Claire emerged slowly from the kitchen, her face pale and drawn, as if the walls were closing in around her. She looked at Michael, panic flashing in her eyes, but he was already frozen in place, his charm crumbling under the weight of the moment. I don't know what you mean," Claire stammered, her voice weak and trembling. Emma's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Still lying, huh? After everything?" Michael shifted uncomfortably, his hands clenching into fists beneath the table. "Emma, don't do this. Not here. Not now." "Why not?" Emma shot back, her voice rising. "You didn't care about the time or the place when you decided to betray me, did you?" Gasps echoed around the room, forks clattered against plates, and her parents exchanged stunned glances, confusion and disbelief etched into their faces. Claire looked as if she might collapse under the pressure, her eyes darting between Emma and Michael, desperately searching for an escape. "Emma, please," Claire whispered, her voice cracking. "This isn't the way to—" "Don't you dare tell me how this is supposed to go," Emma interrupted, her fury bubbling to the surface. "The two of you thought you could sneak around behind my back and I'd never find out? Did you think I'd just sit there smiling like an idiot while you humiliated me?" Michael stood abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Emma, that's enough." But Emma wasn't finished, not even close. She turned her attention to Michael, her voice filled with years of pent-up anger and heartbreak. "How long, Michael? How long have you been sneaking around with my sister?" Michael hesitated, guilt and fear flashing across his face. That fleeting moment of indecision told Emma everything she needed to know. "It doesn't matter," Michael said at last, his voice strained. "It's over now. It didn't mean anything." Claire flinched as if she'd been slapped, the sting of his words cutting deep. Emma caught the flicker of pain in her sister's eyes and felt a cold satisfaction bloom inside her. Good. Let them suffer. Let them feel just a fraction of the agony they had caused her. "It didn't mean anything," Emma repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "That's your excuse?" Michael ran a hand through his hair, his frustration mounting. "Look, I made a mistake, okay? It was stupid, but we can fix this. We can move past it." Emma shook her head slowly, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. "You think we can fix this?" She looked at Claire, then back at Michael, her expression hardening. "You don't even understand what you've done." Her mother finally found her voice, though it trembled with shock. "Emma, what's going on? What is this about?" Emma turned toward her parents, her gaze unflinching. "It's about betrayal, about my husband and my sister." She took a breath, steadying herself. "They've been having an affair." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the air, and the clink of utensils falling against porcelain rang out like a chorus of disbelief. Emma's parents sat frozen, as if someone had pulled the ground out from under them. Claire sank into the nearest chair, covering her face with her hands, while Michael stood rigid, his jaw clenched in frustration and shame. "You've ruined everything," Emma whispered, her voice low but laced with venom. "Everything we built, everything I thought we had, it's gone, all because of the two of you." Michael's hands balled into fists at his sides. "Emma, I told you it didn't mean anything." "It meant something to me," Emma screamed, her voice shattering the thin veneer of civility that remained. "It meant everything to me." The room plunged into stunned silence, the weight of Emma's words settling heavily on everyone present. Claire sobbed quietly, and Michael looked as though he wanted to disappear. Emma stood still, her chest heaving with the effort of keeping her emotions in check. This was her breaking point, the moment everything fell apart. And now, standing amid the wreckage of her life, she realized there was no turning back. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the soft sobs that escaped Claire's lips. Michael stood like a man cornered, his usual confidence drained, replaced by guilt and fear. Emma's parents remained stunned at the revelation, their faces etched with disbelief and devastation. Emma's rage had simmered for so long that it now left behind a cold, hollow emptiness. She looked around the room at the people she once considered family, feeling like a stranger among them. Every glance, every nervous shift in their seats, confirmed what she already knew. Her world would never return to what it had been. Michael tried to regain some semblance of control. "Emma, we can work through this," he said, his voice low, as if pleading for mercy. "I made a mistake. It was stupid, and I regret it. Please, let's not destroy everything we have." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "Destroy everything we have? Michael, you already did that the moment you crawled into bed with my sister." Claire's head shot up at Emma's words, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Emma, I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. It just happened. I didn't know what to do." Emma rounded on her, her voice sharp as a blade. "You didn't know what to do? Here's a thought. How about not sleeping with my husband?" Claire flinched, guilt and shame written all over her face. Michael stepped between them, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Please, both of you, this isn't helping. We need to calm down and figure this out." But Emma was done listening. The betrayal had twisted itself deep into her soul, poisoning every memory, every moment she had shared with the two people who were supposed to mean the most to her. There was no fixing this. There was no going back. "No, Michael," Emma said, her voice deadly calm. "You don't get to tell me to calm down. You made this mess, you and Claire, and now you're going to live with the consequences." Michael clenched his jaw, frustration flashing in his eyes. "You think throwing all of this out in front of everyone helps? We could have dealt with this privately, Emma. We didn't need to make it worse." "Worse?" Emma echoed, incredulous. "You think this could be any worse?" She gestured toward her parents, who sat shell-shocked, and the scattered remnants of the Thanksgiving feast. "Look around, Michael. Do you think there's anything left to salvage?" She let out a long, ragged breath, her entire body trembling with the weight of what had just transpired. The laughter and warmth that had filled the house earlier now seemed like distant memories, buried under the rubble of betrayal. Her parents remained seated at the table, stunned into silence, struggling to comprehend the chaos that had just unfolded. Emma's mother finally spoke, her voice soft and tentative. "Emma, sweetie, what just happened? There must be some kind of misunderstanding." Emma turned toward her, her expression as cold as stone. "There's no misunderstanding, Mom. Michael and Claire betrayed me. They've been having an affair for months." Her father, ever the peacemaker, cleared his throat. "Emma, maybe you can talk to him. Sort this out. People make mistakes." Emma's eyes narrowed, her voice sharper than before. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice they made over and over again. Her parents exchanged helpless glances, realizing there was nothing they could say to make things better. Emma felt the walls closing in on her, the weight of her emotions pressing down until it became unbearable. She couldn't stay in that room, couldn't bear to see the pity in her parents' eyes or the wreckage of the life she had built. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched toward the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. Inside the kitchen, Emma braced herself against the counter, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had shed enough tears for Michael. He didn't deserve any more. Her gaze drifted toward the knife block on the counter. The glint of the steel blade under the dim light sent a dark thought spiraling through her mind. She gripped the counter harder, her knuckles turning white. "This can't go on. I won't let them win." The thought echoed in her mind like a mantra, growing louder with each passing second. They had taken everything from her, her love, her trust, her dignity. Now all that remained was the raw, unrelenting anger burning inside her. Emma closed her eyes, trying to steady her thoughts. But the more she tried to calm herself, the more the rage bubbled to the surface, threatening to consume her whole. She could still hear Claire's voice, pleading for forgiveness. She could still see Michael's smug expression, as if he believed he could talk his way out of anything. A sudden knock at the kitchen door jolted her from her thoughts. Emma stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. "Emma?" her mother called softly from the other side. "Please, come out. We're worried about you." Emma wiped her eyes quickly, composing herself. "I just need a minute," she replied, her voice hoarse. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. Emma exhaled slowly, leaning back against the counter. The silence of the kitchen wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, thick and oppressive. Her gaze returned to the knife block. Her hand hovered over the largest knife, her fingers twitching slightly. But just as quickly as the thought had come, Emma pulled her hand back, shaking her head. No, not like this. Not yet. Instead, she grabbed a dish rag, twisting it tightly in her hands as if it were a lifeline. She needed to think. She needed to plan. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Emma inhaled deeply, the cold, dangerous calm settling over her once again. She had reached her breaking point, but she wouldn't crumble. Not now, because if there was one thing she knew with absolute certainty, it was this. The people who betrayed her would pay, and she would make sure they never saw it coming. Emma emerged from the kitchen, her expression unreadable, but the storm inside her raged quietly. Her parents sat in the living room, casting anxious glances toward her, but she offered no reassurances. The damage was done, and there was no point pretending everything could be fixed. She moved through the house like a ghost, ignoring the remnants of the dinner that remained on the table. Plates and glasses sat abandoned, candles flickered low, and the faint hum of conversations echoed in her memory. Only now it all felt like background noise in the midst of a collapsing world. Outside, the night had fallen, blanketing the neighborhood in darkness. Emma stood at the front window, her hands resting on the windowsill, her gaze fixed on the still street beyond. She didn't know where Michael and Claire had gone, and she didn't care. They had walked out of her life together, leaving her to pick up the shattered pieces. But as she stood there, a strange sense of peace washed over her, cold, unforgiving, and absolute. For the first time in months, Emma knew exactly where she stood. There were no more lies to uncover, no more secrets waiting to surface. The truth was out in the open, raw and ugly, and now all that remained was what she would do with it. The faint crunch of tires on gravel pulled Emma from her thoughts. She watched as Michael's car crept slowly back up the driveway. Her heart thudded heavily in her chest, but her expression remained stoic, her emotions buried deep beneath layers of cold resolve. The front door creaked open, and Michael stepped inside, his face weary and drawn. Claire followed closely behind, her eyes red from crying. They both looked hesitant, as if unsure whether they were stepping back into their old lives or walking straight into the storm they had created. Emma didn't move from her place by the window. She simply stood there, watching them, her silence louder than any words she could have spoken. Michael cleared his throat awkwardly. "Emma, we came back to talk. Can we sit down? Please?" Emma's gaze remained fixed on the window. "What's there to talk about?" Claire shifted nervously, her hands fidgeting at her sides. "Emma, I know you're angry. I know we hurt you, but you didn't just hurt me," Emma interrupted, her voice quiet but edged with steel. "You broke me." Michael took a cautious step closer. "We know, and we're sorry, but we want to make things right." Emma turned slowly, her gaze locking onto him with an intensity that made him falter. "You think you can make this right? You think saying sorry will undo what you've done?" Michael rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at the floor. "I don't know what else to say. I made a mistake, Emma. We both did." "A mistake," Emma repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You didn't trip and fall into bed with her, Michael. It was a choice. Every time it happened, it was a choice." Claire's voice wavered. "Emma, please." Emma shot her a withering glance. "Don't. Just don't." The air between them felt thick, suffocating, and heavy with everything left unsaid. Michael took another step forward, reaching out as if to close the distance between them. But Emma's expression stopped him cold. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "Forgiveness? An apology? Do you really think I can forget what you've done?" Michael exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his guilt. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I love you, Emma, and I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." Emma's laugh was cold and sharp. "Love? You don't love me, Michael. If you did, this never would have happened." The silence stretched unbearably long, the tension in the room coiling tighter with every second. Claire stood frozen, looking as though she might shatter under the weight of it all. Finally, Emma took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you love her?" Michael blinked, startled by the question. "What?" "You heard me," Emma said, her eyes boring into his. "Do you love her?" Michael's hesitation was brief, but it was enough. Emma saw the answer written plainly on his face before he could even open his mouth. I don't know," he admitted quietly. Emma's chest tightened, the final thread of hope snapping inside her. It was worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just an affair. It was something more, something that could never be undone. She stepped back, her voice calm but laced with finality. "You need to leave." Michael's brow furrowed. "Emma." "Both of you," she said, her voice firm. "Leave." Claire's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she said nothing. Michael, too, seemed lost for words, realizing there was nothing left to salvage. He reached for his coat, moving slowly, as if hoping Emma would change her mind at the last second. She didn't. Without another word, Michael and Claire slipped out the door, leaving Emma standing alone in the cold silence of the house. The finality of it settled over her like a weight, pressing down on her chest. Emma turned back toward the window, watching as Michael's car disappeared down the street. The storm inside her had settled, but in its place, a cold resolve took root. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot. The night crept in, bringing with it a deep, chilling stillness. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the edge of her wineglass, lost in thought. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. Outside, the world moved on as if nothing had happened. Inside, Emma's life lay in ruins, every moment of betrayal echoing in her mind. She couldn't stop picturing them, Michael and Claire, together, laughing behind her back, sharing stolen moments. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the deceit, the ease with which they had torn her world apart. They had left her broken, and now they expected her to move on. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Emma's gaze drifted back to the knife block. The largest knife gleamed under the soft kitchen lights, a silent invitation. She reached for it, gripping the handle tightly, her knuckles white with tension. The cold steel felt grounding, a lifeline amidst the chaos. A voice in the back of her mind whispered, "This is how it ends. This is how you take back control." But just as quickly, Emma shook her head, setting the knife down. Not like this. Not yet. She needed a plan, something that would make them feel every ounce of the pain they had inflicted. This wouldn't be over until they knew what it was like to lose everything. Emma rose from the table, her movements deliberate and calm. She wouldn't act impulsively, not this time. This time she would take control, and when the time came, they wouldn't see it coming. The next morning, Emma woke with a strange sense of clarity. The events of the previous night were no longer raw but settled, like a wound scabbed over. She knew what needed to be done. The decision sat heavily on her chest, but it was also oddly comforting. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through her contacts. She found Claire's number first. Without hesitation, she blocked it. Then she did the same for Michael. It was symbolic, but it gave her the first taste of power she had felt in months. Emma moved through the house with quiet purpose. She packed Michael's belongings into suitcases, stacking them neatly by the front door. Every photo, every memento of their life together, she placed in a box and shoved it deep into the garage. Erasing him from the house was like exorcising a ghost, a necessary step in reclaiming her space. By the time she finished, the sun had risen high in the sky, casting warm light over the remnants of their once shared home. Emma stood in the doorway, staring at the suitcases and boxes that now symbolized the end of her marriage. Then, without a second thought, she opened her phone and composed a simple, devastating message. "I know what you did. You'll regret it." She sent it to both Michael and Claire, her finger lingering on the screen for a moment before she hit send. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Hours passed, and Emma didn't wait for a response. She knew they would call, knew they would beg for explanations, apologies, or second chances. But Emma was done giving them power. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was beautiful, a reminder that even the worst storms passed, leaving room for something new to bloom. As she sat there, a weight lifted off her shoulders. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. The chaos, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they were all behind her now. And though the scars would remain, Emma knew she was free. Free to rebuild. Free to move on. The sound of her phone vibrating on the table pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Michael's name flashed across it. She let it ring. And as the call went to voicemail, Emma smiled softly. She had won, not by giving in to the darkness, but by surviving it, by choosing herself, by letting go.